Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Missing Frames. This is the podcast where we watch all the movies we should have seen by this point in our lives. I'm your host, Shawn Eastridge. We're hanging out on the Nerd Party Network, a collection of podcasts dedicated to all things entertainment. So make sure you check us out on thenerdparty.com and that you're following us on Twitix? What is it? Is it X? Is it Twitter? It's all of the above. It's at Join Nerd Party, whatever you want to believe that platform is. And you can like us on Facebook, just The Nerd Party, and follow us on Instagram at The Nerd Party. And it's spooky season. We're in the midst of spooky season. And there are few people I enjoy watching spooky movies with than Mr. John Mills. John, welcome back to the show. After a long absence, it feels like.
Too long an absence, way too long an absence, and I am thrilled to come back under these auspices, specifically because this is a movie that I hate to love, and it's one of those things where I can't wait to share this experience with you, because this is, I mean, you're a huge Simpsons fan, so it blows my mind that you've seen Bart Simpson's Dracula and you've never watched Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Gary Oldman as Dracula. It's absolutely crazy to me.
To be fair, I think The Simpsons has ruined a lot for me. Just in general,
so.
I feel like even The Shining, I think I probably saw that episode before I saw The Shining. But yeah, you are introducing me to this film. I don't know how long ago you were last on, but for some reason, the last movie I remember us doing is The Fog, and I can't imagine we did that a year ago, because it would have been around this time, right?
It's possible. No, I don't want to believe it's been that long.
I don't want to believe that
I will
either.
be mad at myself. I will be mad at you if it's been that long.
Yeah, well, rightfully so.
Yes.
I am the purported genius behind this podcast.
But with
a major asterisk next to genius.
It fills me with such joy. It really does, because this is a movie that came out in 1992, and you were a larva at that point, but I was a fully formed human being, and I saw this in the movie theater. And it's one of those things where I'll go ahead and share, because I love sharing.
Please.
That the first time I saw this film, I showed up. I was supposed to meet a bunch of friends to go see the movie. And my friend Eric was driving, and I think Eric was. We've lost contact in the decades since, but my friend Eric was driving, and we were going to meet everybody, and we were running late. Not my fault. And we got to the theater, and we bought the tickets, and it was at Wheaton Plaza 11, and they had crap signage everywhere, and it was playing in multiple theaters. And we were 20 minutes late. I was like, okay, whatever. And we ran in and we're like, I can't see anybody. Okay, let's just grab the first available seats. And we sit down and the movie ends like 35 minutes later. And I go, wait, what? And we realized we had walked into the wrong theater that was, had started the 30 minutes earlier. And I was like, oh no. So we saw the entire ending of the film, the entire last reel. And then we had to go
just the way Francis Ford Coppola intended.
It's like the old serials, which Coppola and Lucas were big fans of, so you could watch things out of sequence and it still made sense and everything like that. But I mean, yeah, God, we felt so stupid. So technically I saw it 1 1/3 times the first time I saw it. So.
And, well, I assume you've watched it since. I
yes.
would imagine. Okay.
Oh, yes. And I own the 4K Ultra HD.
My Lord. I I really don't know much about this. What I do know about it, maybe I've heard from you, and what I understand about it is that it is a notorious film. Is notorious a good way to describe this film, John?
Yeah, that'd be okay. That'd be okay because it does feature Keanu Reeves as he's trying to stretch his wings.
Yes, that's what I have been made to understand about this film. But really what I've heard about it in general, not knowing much about it except what I've been told, is that a lot of people have kind of crapped on this version of the film. In general, the reputation has been kind of like I haven't heard a lot of people coming out really swinging in defense of this movie, and this may be the exception. I've heard a lot of people kind of say like, yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those movies. It's interesting movie. And that is how it's been presented to me. But it's also like it's Coppola. And I haven't, honestly, I don't know that I've seen a lot of Coppola outside of, The Godfather and Apocalypse Now. So it's definitely a big blind spot. It might not be some people may argue I may not need busy myself with getting on the rest of his filmography.
I disagree.
Okay.
I disagree because Coppola, Coppola is a prolific filmmaker in spurts. The 70s is dominated by Coppola. Okay. I love Star Wars. I love Spielberg and Jaws. I love everything that's going on in the 70s, Scorsese, all of that type of stuff. But when you talk about somebody who comes in and just absolutely punches the 70s in the mouth, right? You go from winning the Oscar for writing Patton to The Godfather, and The Godfather Part 2 and The Conversation coming out in the same year, and then a notoriously difficult production with Apocalypse Now that nonetheless delivers a film that everybody loves, and then the 80s happen. And everyone's like, what the hell happened, Francis? And then he storms back onto the scene with Godfather Part 3. And that gets that's a thing where a lot, people forget, as much as people stomp on Godfather Part 3 now, it got 11, I don't know if it was 11, but it got a ton of Oscar nominations.
You're right. I'm almost positive it was nominated in every major category.
Yes,
Director, actor, film.
Art direction, production design, all of that stuff. And it's purely Sofia Coppola's performance that just completely undoes the thing.
Yeah.
But the re-edit, the one that's the Godfather Coda, that's the edit of the film that should have been released, but whatever. And so this is hard on the heels of that. Coppola is trying in the 90s, and this is part of his effort to prove to the studios he can deliver again. And for any shortcomings you see with The Godfather Part 3, there are still the flashes of brilliance in it. They're still there.
Yeah.
And I would argue with this, I'm not trying to poison the well here or tip my hand. It's a similar sort of thing where you don't walk away with a feeling of oh, this is a great film, but this is a director who gets some tremendous performances out of everybody who can give a tremendous performance at this point.
Is that what we're saying?
We all love Keanu.
Yes,
okay?
we do.
We do. He's John Wick. He's in the Matrix movies, including that fourth one.
He's Ted Theodore Logan.
There you go. But this is not his strongest performance, and it's okay to hold. But everybody else is taking direction from Coppola and really delivering.
Gary Oldman. I think we mentioned that. Anthony Hopkins.
Cary Elway's in a great thing.
Right,
he's in a great performance. I always forget the actor's name, but he's the same guy who played the Rocketeer. Is in it in a supporting part.
Yeah.
He's fantastic.
I know who you're talking about.
Richard E. Grant is terrific in his support. He gets Tom Waits.
Tom Waits is in this movie?
Tom Waits is in this film.
What a treat. Okay, that's definitely piqued my interest for sure.
And it's so fascinating because I remember an interview at the time where Coppola said that the challenge he presented to himself was that the effects were going to be done the way the effects would have been possible back in the 1930s. He was trying to make a movie that effects-wise was evocative of that. Now, there were a couple of things where it's very obviously,
sure.
It's like the blue screen in Star Wars. Yeah,
sure.
Blue screen and rear projection kind of existed before then, but they kind of perfected it, sort of thing.
Right.
But there's a lot of lap dissolves and double exposures and, stuff that was, he gets back to the basics of filmmaking in this, and it's pretty effective visually. Well, but I'm spoiling everything. What do you know about this outside of its reputation?
I know next to nothing about it, and I haven't. I think I've seen the black and white Dracula, the one that is the most iconic. I think.
The Bela Lugosi, 1931.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
I honestly can't say for sure I've seen that all the way through. I haven't read the book Dracula, so what I know about Dracula comes from like Nosferatu and other kind of pop culture and things that I can kind of put together from that.
Okay, this is what I have to ask. With Nosferatu, are you also including the Klaus Kinski 1979 version? It was 1970s. It was Nosferatu. It was very German.
Yeah, then that had to be Herzog, right? That's the one I've seen. I've seen the silent one.
I'm going to feel so terrible if I don't get the year right here.
Do it.
Nosferatu. I'm looking this up live. This is the thrilling content people tune in for.
This is what podcasts are all about.
Things
that you can edit out. This is not a live show. I could edit this part
Yeah,
out.
1979. Nailed it.
Oh,
got it.
My God.
Check that out, bro.
But you're talking about the Herzog version, right?
Oh, yes, it is.
Yes. I loved that film. I really, really enjoyed it. You look very upset about this, or you look distraught.
I have to revisit it because I remember when I watched it, I didn't care for it.
There's some stuff in it that I think is it's a weird film. That's neither here nor there, but that's a film that I
can't imagine.
Tonally, I think is supposed to be funny at points, but the movie is relatively serious.
Herzog and Kinski combining for a weird film. Who saw that coming? But I think that you have because of this, I wound up reading the original book by Bram Stoker. It's one of my favorite books. Like, I adore it. I revisit it every year or two, as a matter of fact, around this time of year.
We've known each other for many, many moons, and I did not know this about you.
I don't know what specifically clicks in the book for me, but it does. It's groundbreaking for its time. It's very much in that the realistic narrator sort of thing, like trying to bring Dracula into the real world.
Isn't it all like it's journal entries? Like you're basically reading from the perspectives of these different characters as they are recounting it to themselves?
Yes, you are reading from the journal entries that are supposedly put together and compiled after the entire thing is over, so that you can get a perspective on what really happened. And so I guess it's the Blair Witch Project in novel form of its day.
Sure, yeah. So it was an attempt to kind of, like you said, pull it into the real world and give it some kind of weight in that regard. So you could, if you wanted to, suspend your disbelief and say, like, yeah, this is a historical document. And I feel like, and as far as like plot of this movie is concerned, just the Bram Stoker. I'm not cutting this part out either. I want to make sure everybody knows how.
We got to give the reality to people. That's what they come to us for.
Yeah. So I feel like having his name on the title is a real an attempt on Coppola's part to say this is our source material, and we are honoring this in a way that perhaps past iterations and adaptations had not been, or maybe weren't even allowed to be at the time. So I get that vibe from this, is that this was like, no, it's an adaptation of that novel.
It is the true West form of the book that I've seen on film. It is not, but it still borrows from elements that crept into it over time, because of the old Hollywood adage, you got to have a love interest, love triangle sort of thing going on.
Sure.
Not present in the book at all. Like, at all, even remotely that way. I'll be interested to see your take on it, because it creates an interesting sort of thing, because I would argue that I don't want to tip it off. I don't want to spoil anything. I want to see if you pick up on the same sort of criticism I'd have of that choice.
I'm excited to see, and I really am. I don't have any expectations for this movie. I feel like it's something based on what I've heard.
Good.
I feel like I'll enjoy it in some respect. I will certainly enjoy talking with you about it, but I've heard everything I've heard about this movie as far as reactions to it are of the extremes. There aren't a lot of middling, like, reactions to this film. It's a lot of either it's a misunderstood masterpiece or it's one of the worst things ever. And I don't know remotely what to expect. I've seen things here and there. I've seen, I think, Gary Oldman's makeup. I've seen some of the production design, the set design, and which is, undeniably impressive. But I really don't know much going into it, which again, not just the fact that I don't know much about this film, but really that I don't know a lot of Coppola outside of his biggest landmark film. So I'm incredibly curious to see, and I can see also how kind of what you're saying, like this is his chance to prove himself. Godfather Part 3, I think in a lot of ways was kind of a contractual obligation, or he was at a point where he needed the paycheck. So there is a feeling of, is this his attempt to be like, all right, now that I've got that off my plate, let me show you what I can do without being tied to this legacy.
While also delivering on time and on budget. Because remember, he's still...
Right.
Apocalypse
You're
Now,
right.
that's the cloud that hangs over you. And Coppola in the present day, there are stories...
Megalopolis, yes.
Stories leaking out about how difficult that production is. And honestly, I'm like, well, that tends to be when Coppola really delivers something.
Yes, that's true.
Super worth watching.
So that'll be, and I'm very interested to see. I'm going in eyes wide open, ready, a little scared, but I'm ready. I'm ready for it.
Awesome.
We'll be back to discuss it, so stay tuned
for Dracula.
Now available to own on video cassette.
All right, we're back, and we are here to talk about Dracula, Dead and Loving It.
Dracula, Dead and Loving It?
Yes.
No.
Leslie Nielsen.
Oh, I saw that in the movie theater.
That's the movie we were discussing. We're not discussing that?
I know I would not have agreed to discuss that because I can tell you that when I saw that in the theater... I and Joey actually walked out of the theater, went to the box office, and asked if we could get a refund. And they said the movie's already 25 minutes in. You may not. So,
is that the actual? Is there an actual specific timestamp that they will not allow you to get a refund?
Well, all I can tell you is at Wheaton Plaza 11 on Christmas Day, they did not want to deal with our S. So, which is fair enough.
No, we're here to talk about Bram Stoker's Dracula. I fooled you. There was a moment there where you were and I on the one hand I did learn that it's Bram Stoker. So apologies for those of you who had to get through all of part 1 listening to me say Bram Stoker.
I still say Bram. I read the book every year. I still say Bram. It
just felt right to say Bram. It felt a little more. It gave it a little more sophistication. I don't know. The hard A. I don't know. No hard A. This is a family show. We shouldn't talk about hard A's.
We're a soft A. We can't push come on.
We're recording this so late.
Yes.
No, Bram Stoker's Dracula. John, this there are 2 adjectives I would use to describe this film, and I mean this in with all due respect and love and sincerity. The first is bombastic. This film is bombastic, out the hard and soft A, and wacky. Wacky is the other word I would use to describe it. I can understand completely why this film has amassed a population of people who maybe love to hate it. However, I also understand completely the apologist perspective, because this film is extraordinarily impressive in many, many ways. In many, many ways, it is completely absurd and ridiculous.
Yes.
But there's also an element, there's certain things, Keanu Reeves, certain things that are just not up to snuff. But it does seem to be Coppola's intention that this movie is really borderline walking the line of camp. Like, it is extremely extravagantly campy and outlandish and genuinely funny at points. And it's an interesting tightrope walk. I was impressed. I don't know if I fully embraced completely this vision of it, but I was kind of I was laughing on the one hand, but also I was sort of in awe of what is being accomplished in this film. And I will say I enjoyed it overall.
I'm glad to hear that. I would have hated to think that we went through this entire experiment and you hated it. I'm firmly, you said there are people who love to hate it. I would say I'm in the camp of the people who hate to love it, because there is so much about this movie that, like you're saying, it's Coppola not just flirting with camp. It's Coppola kissing it, deeply making out with camp. And but there's a sense of, I feel like Coppola's having fun with it. This is not a Coppola who's feeling the pressure of a Godfather Part 3. I have to deliver an epic. This is not Coppola living inside his own head. This is Coppola. This feels like a young Coppola, in the sense that he's being a young Coppola the way that Coppola could never be young when he was a director.
Yeah. It's unhinged in a way that suggests he is having a ball, and it feels intentional. And of course there are things about this that I think you could make the argument that it's like, is that performance, is that moment intentionally camp? And it's like, no, this movie has flaws, certainly. And there are things that don't work about it and are relatively glaring in their brokenness, but it does feel like he really went, like, every single swing he takes, he's going for the fences. And I'd say as many as are missed, there are some really strong hits as well.
People will roll their eyes, and they're welcome to, but I think that what is in this film, the way that Coppola constructs it and approaches it, and I was really thinking about this while I was watching it this time, because I revisit this movie all the time. Saw it in the theater.
In your dreams.
I've always owned it. My brother and I make regular jokes about your friend, D. And we're like, you're narrating this thing. Why wouldn't you just say Dracula? Like, why wouldn't you just say Dracula? I know it's signed D, but just,
that's what I was wondering. I was like, oh, is it a mystery that it's Dracula? Like, is that a name that is, like, forbidden? And then he literally walks in and says, oh, Lord Dracula. And it's like, oh, so you could have just said Dracula. Do you not want to spell it out? Like, come on.
Well, no, but like I guess it was like the form back then, like you would sign with just your letter or something like that. Like, because that's how it is in the novel.
Oh,
in the novel, yes, your friend D, but it still that D stands for Dracula. So it's not like, I don't know why he narrates the D and he doesn't go Dracula. D. Maybe they were. Yeah.
I think there are things where you have to. There are moments that are so funny, like genuinely funny, that they have to be intentional. And some of Gary Oldman's line readings, his performance is astonishing and spectacular. And some of his line readings are very campy, but intentionally. Not in a way that's like, oh, this is so bad, but in a way where, like, he's like, welcome to my home. Yes,
this is some of the happiness which you bring. Yes. I think that there is, this prefigures what we're about to get in the 90s with the resurgence of that sort of Tarantino-esque love affair with the exploitation films of the 70s. I think that this is the first little stylistic beachhead that's established, because this feels like a Hammer film with a real budget and a real direct. Like, this is a Hammer film as if Wells came out of retirement and was like, I'm gonna direct Christopher Lee and Dracula, and it's like, odd but okay. And I guarantee you that Orson Welles directing Christopher Lee as Dracula in the 1970s would have been insanely cool. There's so much visual flair with this film. There's so much that's just beautiful to look at. It's like there's a part where I can I don't know if you ever hit this this point, but like there's so many moments where I'm like, I just don't even care what they're saying or what's happening. I'm just enjoying looking at the shots because it's just beautiful.
That was one thing I was certain of coming out of it in terms of like my feelings on it were like I had a good time watching it, and it's a flawed film, but undeniably visually, production design, cinematography, costumes. It kicks ass as far as technical and visual elements. It is so it's over the top, but in the best way. And what I kept trying to remind myself of, and again, I don't think it's always successful, but what you said, kind of a throwback, and thinking about it in the way of like, as you told me, and it's very clearly evident from the beginning when the big battle is taking place, and you're like, oh, those are cardboard cutouts of soldiers.
Yep.
So they are. I'd forgotten that you'd mentioned that Coppola's creative intent was we are going to only implement the techniques that were available at the turn of the century with cinema, the turn of the 19th century, the 20th century. So I immediately am thinking to myself, like, I appreciate the devotion to this. And then I had to start feeling it out and feeling like, do I want this whole movie to be that? And then really trying to think of it in terms of, well, what if it was black and white? What if it was like made in the 40s and was similar in terms of performance and these elements? Like, how would I feel about it then? And, you know, doesn't excuse some of the issues, but it certainly helps me appreciate more, I think, what Coppola was trying to accomplish here and the zest with which he accomplishes it.
Well, I got to ask you this question because the screenwriter who brought it to Coppola, James V. Hart, his whole intention was to make a finally true adaptation of, I'm going to be the rebel, Bram Stoker's Dracula. But there is the whole fated love business that's tacked on from Nosferatu and the original Dracula and everything, and it's not there in the novel.
Okay,
the
novel, I didn't look, and I haven't read the novel, and I didn't really. I read a little bit about like what elements were there from the film or from the novel that they brought into the film, and certainly I know this is considered to be one of the more faithful adaptations of the novel.
It is the most true adaptation I've ever watched. That doesn't mean that there isn't a truer one out there, but it's the truest one I've seen.
There are so many that you cannot possibly be blamed for not having
It's
seen
definitely
all
better
of them.
than the 1970s Jack Palance one, I can tell you that.
But is it better than Dracula Dead and Loving It is what I really want to
Everything's better than Dracula Dead and Loving It, Sean.
But
Everything.
I have not read the book, so I can't say for certain, but it definitely felt like I couldn't parse what was taken from the novel versus what was kind of shoehorned in with the love story. And it felt like a lot of the elements were with... Is it Vlad the Destroyer? Who is this supposed to be?
Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler.
Right, the Impaler.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah, Vlad
Destroyer, Impaler. It's hard to keep these guys track of these guys' names. But I think this movie, from what I understand, it was kind of explicitly going in that direction, saying, yes, Dracula is this guy, where it's more alluded to in the source material. And I think that maybe they felt kind of opened the doors to them saying, so we're going to do this more romantic interpretation of, he was married and his wife killed herself because she thought he'd gone to war and died, and made it more of a tragedy. Whereas in the source material and the general story of Dracula, he's more just pure evil and just driven by that evil.
Like, there's so much at work in the novel, and one of the elements in actuality, like that I think is there, is the whole struggle of the old world versus modernity. Like, if you really think about it, this is Dracula, the novel, and a lot of the stuff like Frankenstein, all of those things come at a time when people are going through one of those phases where they're struggling with the way the industrial age is developing and science and everything like that. It's kind of freaking people out because you're going from the world that Dracula's in with lords and nobles and farmers and devotion. And, he has the Slovaks who are devoted to their lord, whoever is living in that castle sort of thing. And then you have the more modern Europe represented by Harker and everybody else, and they don't understand. And Dracula even says, that Transylvania's ways are old ways. And Dracula wants to go. So there's this sort of sense of like the old world is trying to reclaim things in the modern world. And I'm sure that there are probably people saying, "No, you can't possibly read that in the book." But trust me, it's definitely there in the book.
Well, and you've read the book, but certainly that's always been kind of the subtext of the idea of the vampire in general, even in terms of like sexual repression of this older era where like the vampire kind of has this like dangerous element of sexuality that's involved. I have a feeling that's not as explicit in the book.
No. The vampire wives, there's definitely a sense of sexual thrill for Harker in it, but
even
again,
for what's her name? Is it Miri?
Lucy?
No, not Lucy. Well, Lucy,
Mina.
Lucy and Mina. There is kind of that sexual awakening element as well.
Not so much in the book.
Yes,
Not
which
so much in the book.
I believe. That's
the book is of its time.
Yes, they can crank that up. With an R-rated Coppola movie, they can certainly crank up the dial a bit with that stuff.
But I think and because we were talking about Star Wars before we started recording, I think that the Mina Dracula fated love thing, that is a vestige of Coppola coming from the era of you got to have a love story. There's got to be a love story or a love triangle or something in the middle of and it feels a lot like, in all honesty, Starkiller based in The Force Awakens, where it's like you had a script and somebody had to inject that. And it's like, it worked just fine without it. Like, you didn't need to do that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I hate that it always comes back to Starkiller base, but I understand it. Well, that definitely, as far as the biggest weakness in the film, I do think I like the idea of, and I think this is in the original story, that Dracula becomes enamored with this particular woman, although I don't think the backstory is specifically like it's his long lost love reincarnated and da-da-da. But it did feel like the weakest element in the film. And some of that, I think, comes from maybe Winona Ryder and Keanu Reeves and their general lack of, maybe not a lack of chemistry, but just like their relationship is so quickly thrown out as like they're in love, and then he goes off and disappears, and then Dracula shows up and is like, "But I love you," and she's like, "Oh, I love you too." And I was like, wait a second, is she imagining this? Is she cheating on him, on Jonathan, and what is going on? And it was hard to keep track of like what any of it really meant, like what the stakes of that love story was. Like when Jonathan's getting tortured and by these vampire witches.
Don't put tortured in air quotes, Shawn. Come on, it's torture.
I mean, torture. Monica Bellucci is holding him against his will. I mean, is he really being held against his will?
I'd say Jonathan's not fighting as hard as he should have.
Yes, he probably should have fought a little bit harder.
He had some inner conflict there.
But it felt like, that kind of romantic setup was a bit forced, but also a lot of the Jonathan stuff, and I'm sorry, and we'll talk about it. It comes down to Keanu's performance, but even script-wise, it feels like when it cuts back to him, it's like, oh, that's right, he's in this movie. Like when the whole sequence where he finally escapes, I was like, oh yeah, I guess he has to escape, but it feels like an afterthought in the story. And again, that could come down to just weaknesses in the script. It could come down to that performance, which is incredibly strange. Or it could just come down to the strength of Gary Oldman's take on Dracula and just how like literally hypnotizing it is. But I did feel like when it tried to revolve around that story and the relationship between Jonathan and her, that's where it kind of falls apart for me.
If I'm being generous, it's Coppola setting up what you're talking about, which is the idea of fidelity. Is she true to him? Is he true to her? Do they still, like, can their love survive, sort of thing? It never really gels the way that it should. And I think that, I mean, the problem with humanizing Dracula, especially in that way, is it confuses his motivations with Lucy. And because in the source material, and I'm not doing it as like, oh, it has to be true to the source material, but it dampens the horror of what he's doing to Lucy. Right. He's a monster. He's a murderer. He's absolutely evil, but he's in love with her, so he can't be that bad. It softens him too much.
I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I think the conflict of this film and where it doesn't quite work is in that attempt to humanize Dracula. A lot of, I think, what as you're saying this out loud, it's occurring to me that I think a lot of my problem with the film does come down to that. And it's because of the reasons you explained, but also because, and let me just be clear, Gary Oldman's performance in this film is stunning. He is awesome. He is very much the best part of the movie, and that's not to, Anthony Hopkins is great. Like, there's a lot of great performances in this film, but he is just on his game, and it's great. But Dracula in general. So on the one hand, you have Jonathan, who's just not interesting, and Keanu does that part no favors. You don't really get a sense of their love for each other. There isn't really a romantic connection, so that when they're pulled apart, it doesn't feel like there's anything at stake. And the problem with Dracula is if you're going to bring him into the story and have him kind of with his long lost love, he's still behaving kind of like a creeper. There's an element of creepy hypnotism where you don't know if Winona Ryder loves him because he's kind of doing his Dracula thing and hypnotizing her, or if there's a genuine attraction there that comes from the spirit of his long lost love, that there is a meant to be connection there. And I think this film, the phrase is style over substance. Yes. I think this film is certainly an example of that. It's an example of how that can work, that can actually work. And that's a good thing. I don't typically enjoy that direction, but in this case, I think it works really well. But I do think it works at the detriment of I think Coppola is trying to aim for the affecting emotional center in this wild, wacky film. And I don't think it quite works because these elements are not quite, they don't quite gel in the way they need to for you to feel emotionally connected to that story.
And again, I think that does tie into the fact that you are dealing with a monster who literally fed a child to 3 monster women. And I'm supposed to be like, oh, at least he's found love. It's like, not no, screw that guy. He's terrible.
Yes.
He spent hundreds of years murdering children and villagers. It's not also, like he was hanging there like with a knitting club or something.
Right. But he's also from the get-go. It's not a situation like, The Fly, like David Cronenberg's The Fly.
Yeah. Right.
Where it's like you watch this poor scientist succumb to his invention and turn into a monster and lose his humanity. From the get-go, Dracula, we get that little prologue that is intended to build sympathy. Like, oh, his wife killed herself and now he's angry at God and he curses God, and that's what brings the curse upon him. But we don't know enough really about their relationship or him as a person other than like he's a murderous conqueror. And they kiss really weirdly, and it's strange. That's really all we know about them. And then
Anthony Hopkins was also
Anthony, he was there too. And when we see him again, he's creepy monster Dracula being very over the top, creepy, and practically a parody of Dracula, but like completely committed, completely on point, and fantastic. But we're not, I think maybe that's the problem, is the movie is immediately throwing us into the realm of like, he's a monster, he's evil, he's feeding babies to his mistresses, and he behaves in a way that suggests he's evil. And then later on, when it expects us to like, oh, but we want you to invest in this love story, I think you're absolutely right. You've, in the back of your head, it's just, it's knocking against your better judgment, where you're like, this guy is a monster. I don't know if his intentions are pure with Winona Ryder. Therefore, I don't know if I'm supposed to feel anything for this relationship.
When he moves against Winona Ryder in the book, it's specifically, he's like, I'm going to punish you where it hurts the worst.
Right.
And that's what it is. I think that I will forever insist that the best way to have edited things together would have been just to start super creepy in London, spend maybe a little bit more time setting up Jonathan and Mina, have the story just start from there, and not do the story of how Dracula became Dracula until Anthony Hopkins, he's sitting there reading the book and goes, yeah, Dracula, right? Like,
yes.
And then tell the story. And it's like, that's where it feels like it belongs.
Yeah.
Even though score-wise, I love the bombast of the opening. Like, it just slaps you in the face, and it's like, we are going.
It is romantic, and it is overblown, like a Cecil B. DeMille production. It is that level of bombast, that like it really, and it's like, there's a part of you that's watching and thinking, yeah, but it's not the 1950s anymore. But then there's the other part of you that's kind of like, so what? I appreciate the complete commitment to this. And I agree with you. I think there are things that I'm kind of like, this could have been a little better. This could have been, and maybe tone it down a little bit. Cause it does. I mean, there was a feeling of like, is this kind of the precursor to Joel Schumacher Batman? Like, is this kind of opening the doors a little bit for that kind of like,
don't settle it with that. Come on, be nicer.
Well,
than
look,
that.
This is from a Batman Forever apologist, so I say that with love.
Okay,
but
no,
there was an element of, I think Batman Forever doesn't quite straddle the line of parody versus sincerity as well as this movie, perhaps, but there is a feeling of like, you have to embrace the complete, insane, colorful, over-the-top vision and the larger-than-life scale of everything, because you look at these sets, you look at these costumes, and you look at the editing techniques and the in-camera effects, and they look hokey, yes, but you also are kind of sitting there saying, he said he was going to do it, and he did it, and I appreciate that, and I respect that.
Yeah, I think that because you mentioned Batman Forever, and I would say I'd go with a better movie than that. I'd say The Fifth Element.
There is no better movie than Batman Forever. Let's just get that on the record.
Well, okay. All right, fair. You win that argument finally. There you go. It's being deposed from Citizen Kane in my collection right now. I'm going to go ahead and put Batman. Yeah, but it's maybe it is because I was talking about earlier with this prefiguring sort of like the re-embrace of the exploitation sensibility. But I think you're spot on too, talking about the fact that this is a guy doing an homage to the horror movies he watched growing up when he was going to the cinema, sort of thing. And I don't know. I mean, like, I would say that ultimately both the blessing and the curse of this film is that I think if you picked it apart as segments, the segments that work are just brilliant. And it's like there's almost a part of you that like loves them so much that it's like, yeah, I'll ignore swinging camera with Dracula double exposed over top of them running in a maze because that sucks. But like then we have something like the Vampire Hunters music, which has been it was used in trailers all throughout.
Yeah,
the 90s.
I thought it did sound familiar. Yeah.
And it sounds like Mars, the bringer of war. And it's like, it's really great. And I will butcher his name, but I so love the score from Wojciech Kolar. Never. Yeah. Sure.
Bram Stoker.
I bought the soundtrack for this like the day after I saw the movie. I love the music in this film. It is every bit. I honestly think that one of the things that makes me as forgiving of the things that don't work in this is that the score is so damn good.
Yeah.
It's so fantastically, perfectly opulent. And I think that this score winds up being very influential in a lot of ways. It even pops up in an episode of Star Wars, The Clone Wars, when they have an attack sequence that General Grievous is leading in through the rings of a planet. And like it struck up and I was like, oh my gosh, they just took Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah, like it jumps out at you if you know the score. You're like,
right.
Oh, what an homage. And the Vampire Hunters cue, I listen to this score in fall of every year.
It's a great. It's a great seasonal. I mean, it is. It's imposing. It's epic. It's adventurous, and it's tragic. And a lot of it's hitting a lot of the beats that the film doesn't quite hit. And there are plenty of examples of like the music pushes these moments over the edge. Great film scores can do that, and I think Dracula's film score certainly belongs to a better movie, but also belongs to this movie. It works.
It is in some sense, although this is, I think, honestly a better film overall. It's sort of like the score from Star Trek V, which I make reference to all the time.
Yes.
The score is so good.
It is.
That like you keep watching the film sometimes because you're like, yeah, but this music is just so great.
Yeah,
like
agreed.
You just can't stop.
That's a great example. I do love. I've already mentioned Gary Oldman, Anthony Hopkins. I was going back and just rewatching some of his scenes and realizing just how funny he is, how brilliant he is. But he also has this like wry sense of humor that I kind of clocked the first time I watched it, but going back and watching clips of him and the performance and the little things he does, I was like, this is a movie I'm going to have to return to pick up on some of this stuff that I didn't pick up on the first time. One of my favorite, and again, this is where you have to say like, this movie is Coppola's intention is to elicit laughter. But when he's sitting, they're having dinner at the tavern or whatever. Yep. And she's like, did Lucy suffer much or whatever? Was she in pain? And he's like, was she in pain? Yes, of course. And it cuts to the shot of just them sitting with the decapitated head, and the hunters, and they're all sitting kind of solemnly behind it. And he's like, yes, she was in pain. I chopped off her head, and then she was okay. Yeah. And you can't watch the way that's cut and the way Hopkins performs that scene and not think it was supposed to be funny, because it's very much a Wes Anderson cutaway moment where it's just like the way the shot is composed and what the seriousness with which Winona Ryder is asking the question, and Hopkins frivolous like, yes, we chopped off her head. It was fine. It was very, very funny. But I think Hopkins is brilliant, and I think he's giving an excellent dramatic performance, but also I think there's some great wry humor in his performance.
Oh,
as well.
He's winking at the camera.
Yes.
Hardcore.
Yes.
And I think that very specifically Coppola's asking him to. There is, and he's one of those, this may, okay, I'm going to go, this is my controversial opinion. Okay. Anthony Hopkins is a great actor. And I know I know.
Extremely
I'm alone.
yeah.
You know, I'm alone in that.
Hot takes
But
on missing frames.
I think that he's winking at the camera, and I think that he's one of those few talents where when a director comes to him and says, I want you to wink, but not too hard at the camera, Hopkins is like, I got you. I know what you're talking about here. You know, like you don't have somebody like, you know, going too crazy with it, like who can deliver those lines too, where he's like, are you suggesting that somebody came in and just sucked out her blood? Yeah. You know, like it's just matter of fact. It's like, you know, like that's such a dense, just nails that moment so perfectly.
Well, it's the same thing he did with Hannibal Lecter, where it's like this kind of larger than life persona imbued with humanity.
Yes.
Like a humanity that you connect with despite the whatever horrible things that character has done. You still empathize and connect with him because Hopkins is so good at what he does that he is able to generate that empathy. And it's what he does with Van Helsing, this larger than life, you know, he's a vampire hunter, and he does ham it up in a way, but it's grounded in sincerity. There is a core of that performance that is honest and pure, and it lets him get away with the moments that are kind of, you're like, am I supposed to be laughing at this? Because he's so into it and so committed to the bit that yes, it is funny. It is supposed to be funny, and he knows it, but he's not betraying. It's that moment where the moment you are trying to be funny, you are not funny. But if you are focused and committed to the bit and just portraying that as truly, as honestly as you can, it suddenly becomes hilarious.
And this is specifically, this comes out in 92. So this is like a year after Hannibal Lecter.
Yes.
So just a masterful flip of everything. And it's suddenly like, oh, wow, this is okay. This guy can do everything.
Yeah.
Just perfect. Like I honestly think this performance winds up cementing him with the reputation that he so greatly deserves, because you see him play Lecter, he terrifies everybody, he wins an Oscar, and then this role happens, and you're like, wow, okay, talk about range.
Yeah.
You know, look at that. It's nuts. But I firmly fall in the camp. I think there is just too much to love about this film, that there's a part of me, a dark, horrible part of me, that would take just a lighter to every copy of the film and destroy it. But then there's another part of me that feels that it's in love with the spirit of what it was trying to be so long ago.
I understand this conflict because I think I feel exactly, maybe almost exactly the same way. And, you know, we've been gushing about the film. Let's talk a bit about the things that don't work. And maybe I think this is very telling. When I was Wikipedia-ing, as we often do, we have very official researching methods on missing frames. But just I wanted to see, like, well, how much did this film make? What was the response to it? Because, like I said in part one, my understanding of this film was that it's kind of seen as a kind of a disaster, or like it was ridiculous and overblown, and Coppola, as he lost his, almost everything that isn't, you know, something he made in the 70s is like, has Coppola lost his mind? Can he make movies anymore? So I kind of felt like, oh, this was kind of a disaster, or like people didn't like it. But the film got generally positive reviews, did extraordinarily well at the box office, which frankly is shocking to me, because this movie is extraordinarily bizarre. It is a bizarre, wacky vision that even early 90s, you know, talking about kind of those camp elements, I don't necessarily know that the audience would have appreciated. Obviously the audience still doesn't appreciate it, because otherwise this film, I think, would be more beloved than it is. But that was kind of shocking. But I think it's in the reception section of the Wikipedia page, there is a whole subsection titled Keanu's Performance.
Oh, yes.
And I love Keanu Reeves, as every warm-blooded human beings should. He is a beautiful soul. I'm glad he exists. I love him. I think he has delivered some absolutely great performances. This performance, even as I braced myself for this being kind of the nadir of like criticism lobbied at this film, even as I braced myself, I was not quite prepared for that accent. There is nothing. I unleashed this accent on my boss. I said, I watched this movie and I'm going to send you just like a collection of clips. If you look up Keanu Reeves Dracula, I think it's one of the videos that pops up. And she's like, I had to turn it off after like 30 seconds. I could not.
Oh, yes.
It hurt so much. I say this with utmost love in my heart, but Keanu's performance is so disastrous that it certainly brings the movie down a notch.
His performance highlights everything that doesn't work.
Yeah. Yes.
Because it brings you out. And I think that what additionally brings you out with him is that there is a tremendous British actor in the film who could have played this role and done an absolutely fantastic job with it. And his name was Cary Elwes. And he played Lord Arthur Holmwood. And he would have been a great Jonathan Harker. And is
he British?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure he is.
Hold on. Wait.
To the Book of Knowledge.
It's Wikipedia, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, you're right. Westminster. Okay. For some reason, I thought he was... Because I swore he was British, too. And for some reason, I thought somebody actually me and said, no, he's American.
No, that's why in Robin Hood Men in Tights... They say, what makes you different? He goes, unlike other Robin Hoods, I can speak with a British accent.
Yeah. Well, that's why I thought it was like he was saying, like, I can actually do the accent correctly. So I think that's where my misconception came from.
He would have been tremendous as Jonathan
Agreed. Harker. He's a wonderful, wonderful actor, and could have.
And I can honestly say, you take Elwes and you put him in as Harker, and maybe even keep Keanu and turn him into Holmwood.
Yeah.
And that way his lackluster accent he's in it enough that it doesn't really. And he also,
the vampire hunters are kind of, their accents are all over the place anyway. So like he could just, here I am. I'm here. I'm the
Dracula's in the castle.
Yeah. It's like
wolves aren't awesome.
You could have like argued like it was all these guys are kind of weird and wacky. But I agree. And it is a failing in the script too, because Jonathan's role is just, it's kind of thankless. Like he's the bland guy who's like, what's going on? I'm the love interest. And I get captured, and then I escape, and then I'm just kind of pining and whining about my bride.
The difficulty is that Jonathan is supposed to represent the stiff British insistence on proper. Like, you're supposed to react as Jonathan's telling his story. At least, I believe you should react in such a way, like where it's sort of a commentary, where it's like any sensible person encounters Dracula and is like, peace. I'm out. No, I am not staying. Like, I'm out the door immediately. I'm not even walking through the. Welcome to my home. I will get eaten by wolves. I'm okay. Bye. But the whole insistence on British proper formality sort of thing. Jonathan, I'm going to become a clerk at a law firm, and I must do all of these things properly, and stiff British upper lip. There's sort of like a commentary on British society going on there. And, or rather I should say a segment of British society going on there. And this is not the characterization to convey that. And because there's nothing about Keanu's performance, this is where his performance fails, is that Harker seems like an idiot. Harker is supposed to seem like somebody and would be more effectively played as somebody who is sitting there saying, this is the creepiest, worst thing I've ever had to endure, but I'm going to stick it out because the benefit is that I will be able to provide for my wife.
Yeah.
I don't want to be here. This sucks. I don't like this guy. I don't trust him. I don't think there's anything good happening here. And then by the time he's like, it's sort of the typical problem. It's like, if I just ride this out, I'll be able to be done. And then he writes the letters and he's like, oh, wow, that strategy failed big time. Instead, all you get is that he's just waiting for things to happen to him.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem. I can overlook a bad accent if you give me a characterization. I never have a sense of why Jonathan isn't gone in 2 seconds. And that is the big hurdle, is I should get a sense that Jonathan knows something's wrong, senses something bad is there, but is trying to figure out a reason to leave and then can't get there in time. Like he's bound by social norms and stuff like that again don't apply to Dracula.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Agreed.
He's, but
I think, and I don't think the blame can be like laid solely at Keanu's feet for that direction, because again, you look at, like we were saying, Gary Oldman from the get-go is creepy monster Dracula. Like from the get-go, he is a monster. And he is very, very, especially in those early scenes, very like ham-fisted and relishing this performance in a great way, but also like it's very over the top and so obviously evil that Keanu as Harker comes across as just dim-witted, like you're saying. He's dumb. He's completely clueless in a way that it's like, that's kind of the story. Like there is an element of like, why are you going here? Why are you trusting this guy? But I think because Gary Oldman is like cranked up to 11 and Keanu is just like negative 11, it's just like they're both in two different movies, and it's up to Coppola to bring them together. And I don't think Coppola, he certainly did not serve Keanu well in that realm. And he's admitted as much. Keanu he's like, the poor guy worked harder than anybody on his accent, but like that ultimately made him stilted in his performance. And he's like, I liked him too much to criticize him, so it's my fault.
That is his fault, especially considering Coppola fired Harvey Keitel during Apocalypse Now after footage was shot, where he's like, this isn't working, fire him. Find me somebody, Martin Sheen, put that guy in there. Like, it's like, Marty's not dead until I say he's dead. Get his brother to do some voiceover work. Like, there's this whole thing where it's like, maybe a little bit of that Coppola should have been in the director's chair.
Yeah. And to be fair, I think it is the Keanu Reeves magic. I think he is as charming and kind-hearted as you want to believe he is. And Winona, I don't know if this has been confirmed, but I think she said that like there were points where Coppola asked Keanu to like get a reaction out of her by like shouting really obscene things to like stoke a reaction, and Keanu was like, no, I'm not going to do that. Just the typical gentlemanly Keanu Reeves that we all know and love. And I think Coppola was just like, he loved him and respected him, knew that he needed a pretty boy in the role to like bring people into the seats to make that
financing
romance
from
work.
the studio.
Exactly.
It's not about getting people in the seats. It's about getting the studio to be like, yeah, okay, fine, we'll take a risk.
It's about getting the studio to believe you can get people in the seats with the right star power. And Keanu, it doesn't work, but he is he's an incredibly attractive human being, visually striking, and just not there performance-wise at all. Like
but again, what happened to the Coppola where he's like, hey, Keanu, say these terrible things to Winona Ryder. Sorry, dude, I can't do that. Pushes Keanu out of the way. Fine, I'll do it myself. Right. Roll the camera. I'm going to yell at him.
Yeah. Is Sophia available? We'll get her to do it. I don't.
Well, gosh, I mean, if you think about it, right? Winona Ryder was supposed to be in Godfather Part 3. This is almost like a make good.
Isn't that interesting how that worked out? And Winona apparently brought him the script too. Like, even in the midst of their, like, the turmoil and their relationship is kind of rocky, she was like, hey, what about the script? And he's like, sure, let's do it. And let's talk about Winona a little bit. I don't think she is, I think she's good. I don't think she is anywhere near Keanu Reeves levels of performance here. But I also, there is this feeling of a slight awkwardness. Like, she's also the it girl of the time, and therefore she's in this movie, but isn't necessarily right for the role. And she's not wrong for it. She's fine and she's serviceable, but I don't know. I there was something off about that, and I think part of it was also just because I felt that sense of she has to be in the movie, and she brought the script, and Coppola agreed to work with her, and it does feel like she's there because she has to be.
I think that she escapes a lot of criticism because of Keanu Reeves. I think Keanu Reeves serves like this weird dual role where he drags down and exposes certain flaws, and then you overlook other flaws because, you have inside the film itself, you have a sliding scale of acting prowess. And it's like, all right, we got Oldman and Hopkins down on this end, and we got Keanu down on this end, and everybody falls somewhere in between the two of them. Yes,
agreed. So just want to throw that out there. I think she's perfectly fine in the movie, and she does a decent job. Again, I think the script fails her and Keanu especially. They're just the weak link on every level. They're kind of the weak link of the film. But everything else is a blast. So it's flawed, but fun. And I can take a flawed movie if it's fun. Rapid fire things I really enjoyed. Tom Waits is in this movie. We haven't talked about him. He's in the movie.
Oh, he's great as Renfield. And actually, I came to discover that the voice I do for my dog because I can read her mind, so I can give her dialogue in the family. Surprisingly close to Tom Waits' voice.
And he's great.
It's a mix of Tom Waits' voice and the dog that talks to Berkowitz in Son of Sam.
Yeah.
It's in between those two.
I needed more Tom Waits. I wish he could have been more involved in what was going on, because he
was great.
He's also like kind of on the outside of everything happening, and every so often we'll go, oh, what's Renfield up to? Oh, he's here and he's still crazy. Okay, great, let's move on. Like, wish he had somehow become more involved in the story. There is an absurd orgy in the film involving Dracula's brides and Harker, which is also
well, you're being a little harsh. It's an icebreaker. Okay, they're just getting to know him.
Getting to know him. But Keanu's scream at the end is like on the level with his what was it, Johnny Mnemonic monologue? Like, I want room service. Like, this should be in that montage of like Keanu's best and brightest.
That is a fantastic pull on Johnny Mnemonic. I applaud you, sir. I've tried to forget that film so many times through the years, but yes, you're correct. I give you that.
I was really excited when somebody said Captain's Log as a Star Trek fan. I don't think I've ever heard the words Captain's Log used outside of a Star Trek related property, so that was exciting. I loved Gary Oldman. This is, I mean, again, you have to believe this is intentional, because it completely is. But when the wolf comes in, and he goes, he likes you. Yes, I love that more than anything, more than life itself. In terms of impressive, like, these are some of the things that are just kind of ridiculous. The Lucy's death and the explosion of blood. Awesome.
Yeah, pretty crazy, huh?
Amazing moment. And also in terms of just in-camera special effects, Dracula turning into the rats.
It's pretty cool.
There are things that I don't know. The rats thing, I could see that being done in camera. The morphing of his face from old to young, I want to believe there's some CGI trickery there, because I don't know how you could do it otherwise. But things like the rats, it's like, yes, I believe this is in camera, that they did this practically. I don't know how they did it, but that's extremely, extremely cool.
Oh yeah, when he turns from the bat into, even though you can hardly understand him. He's like, I'm like, listen, I'm not one for subtitles, but
Please.
I've spent the last 30 years trying to understand every word that he's like. I know what he's saying because it's taken me decades to piece together all of the words. I'm like, I am part of the Christopher Nolan school where it's like, just let it happen organically on set as much as you can.
Yes.
But every so often, maybe redubbing somebody when they don't have the appliances in, it's okay. They know what they said. You can hear them a little clearer. It's all right.
I really love the shadows, the disconnected shadows, and the weirdness. Which is, have you seen the movie Vampire?
No, but I always go back to the way they made fun of it in Bart Simpson's Dracula. That's always been one of my favorites.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh man. And again, you mentioned this in part 1, speaking to the Simpsons things where I've seen the Simpsons episode, haven't seen the thing it's based on. And now
Bart Simpson's Dracula will be so much funnier when you watch it again.
A new appreciation for that.
Yes.
But I love that, shades of Nosferatu, but definitely I got vampire vibes from that. There's a lot of weird shadow stuff in that movie. And that's also a great vampire movie. Great movie in general that everyone should watch.
Vampire. How does one spell that? Vampyr.
Yep.
Ah, there we go.
And I can't remember. I think it's Carl Dreyer. This is the handy dandy Wikipedia is going to
the Book of Knowledge.
Yes, the Book of Knowledge. Yes, Carl Theodor Dreyer, who also did. There was a Joan of Arc film he did, which I have not seen. But this is 1932's black and white silent film. Definitely worth watching if you get a chance. Very visually like hypnotic, bizarre, creepy. Better than Dracula, but that's not a knock against Dracula. That Vampire is a great, great movie, and certainly a great one to pull from, especially if you're making a vampire movie. So love that stuff, and just in general, love Anthony Hopkins chopping people's heads off. That's one of my favorite things. I wish it could be in more.
It's something he was
films.
born to do. When
yes,
you think about it.
He really, really was. He is 100% committed to that. There's a lot of great stuff in this movie. There's a lot of really cool, creepy stuff. Vampire Lucy, that whole sequence is great.
Yes.
A lot to like about the movie. A lot where I completely understand why people are so hard on it. But I do think it merits... it does merit a second glance. It does deserve defenders like you, John, going to bat for it. Going to bat
Whoa!
for it. It is a film that I can't say I love, but I enjoyed it, and I think despite its flaws, it is worth a watch.
Even to watch the end credits so you can hear Annie Lennox's love song for Vampire.
Yes. What a tune. What a tune. Definitely a highlight of the film viewing experience for me. But is there anything else that needs to be said about Bram Stoker's Dracula?
No, there really isn't. I don't think so.
We've done it. We've said everything that needs to be said.
You know what? Right. And we did it in less than 60 minutes. So that is in and of itself an amazing feat.
Pretty amazing. So I guess we have to do it. I'm sorry, Keanu. How many Keanu Reeves British accents would you give Bram Stoker's Dracula on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest, 1 being the lowest?
Well, I can tell you that this ranking infuriates another Nerd Party member, Tristan Riddell.
Oh, I saw when I went on Letterboxd to log this. I saw Tristan's review,
Tristan,
which is what did John just make me watch?
If Tristan did not have weak spaghetti noodles for arms, he would probably take a swing at me over this rating. However, the rating I give it is a solid 4, because for all the flaws that I could come at this movie about, I can't stop. It's like Pringles. I'm like, this isn't really a potato chip, but damn, I enjoy what I'm having right now.
Oh my God! Once you pop the fun, don't stop.
I'm not always in the mood for Pringles, but when I am, man, I'm polishing off a whole can of it. So this is for Keanu. British accents.
I will give it a 3 right down the middle.
Okay.
We'll say I had fun with this, and certainly, I feel like I've been slacking in my Halloween movie watching this year. This was a really fun one that I hadn't seen to kind of like, you know what, I got to get into the spooky season a little bit more. Let me fire up some other horror movies. So I absolutely appreciate and thank you, John, for introducing me to this film.
And now I retire my 4K UHD for another year.
Oh boy. All right. Well, John, if the good people out there want to find you elsewhere, you were elsewhere on the Nerd Party Network and just out and about floating around, but where can they find you?
Well, look for me neatly packed in boxes of earth from my homeland, soaked in the blood of past wars, known as Kessel Junkie from Kesselvania. And you can find me here on the network, co-hosting 2 shows. One is called Aggressive Negotiations. It's a Star Wars podcast I co-host with Matt Rushing. And the other one is House Lights that I co-host with Darren Moser and the aforementioned weak, noodly armed Tristan Riddell.
And I'm still at A Shonderman on TwitterX. And I am not. I mean, if you say hi to me, I'll say hi back. But I really try to avoid that demon spawn of hell as often as possible. That demon spawn of hell of a platform. Letterboxd, I'm Shonderman05. Find me there as well. And
which means 4 other people picked that before you did, which blows my damn mind.
I still am genuinely
I'm finding
stunned.
all 4 of those people, and I'm just taking care of business someday soon.
Very upset about this, and I hope someday Letterboxd will answer my calls and my emails. But thank you again, John. Always a pleasure to have you on the show, and thank you everyone for listening. We will see you at the movies.